Up next in the broadcast, after months of negotiations, Korea and the United States finalized a cost-sharing agreement for U.S. troops on the peninsula. Preparing for unification becomes a new buzz phrase, and this week we dissect the costs and benefits along with the challenges and risks of a single Korea. Thousands of protesters start a campaign to shut down Thailand's capital as part of ongoing efforts to unseat Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra. Primetime News begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Monday, January 13th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hae.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. After a months-long tug-of-war, South Korea and the United States have finally settled on a new cost-sharing agreement for the stationing of U.S. troops here in Korea.
But some are wondering aloud whether this was the best Seoul could do. Her Han Da-eun reports.
$866.6 million. That is the amount South Korea will pay this year to keep the more than 28,000 U.S. troops on the Korean peninsula. Seoul's foreign ministry says this was a successful deal as Washington has settled on an amount that's $75 million less than what it initially wanted, despite automatic spending cuts known as the sequester that have slashed the military's budget. But what's more worthy of notice, officials say, is that the U.S. agreed on specific measures to enhance transparency. Washington had long been criticized by the South Korean public for not revealing how defense costs were spent. A new monitoring system will be set up that'll effectively track shared military expenditures, and the two sides will be required to submit annual spending reports to the Korea-U.S. Integrated Defense Dialogue, better known as KIDD. The U.S. will also report defense cost outlays on the peninsula to the Korean parliament.
We have made an effort to produce a reasonable outcome that's acceptable to the parliament and the people, taking into account the stationing conditions for the U.S. troops, as well as our government's financial capacity.
But some are critical of the deal, saying it has left several long-standing issues unresolved. They point out that Washington is not keeping its promise to shoulder the cost of relocating the main U.S. military base from Seoul to Pyeongtaek in 2016. Instead, they seem to be amassing a large amount of money and asking for more, but it's not clear how much has gone to the Pyeongtaek relocation. The deal will be taken to the parliament in early February for ratification. But amid such divided opinions, it looks like it won't necessarily be smooth sailing. And then, Arirang News.
And we move on to New Year's press conference by the main opposition Democratic Party.
The party's chief, Kim Han-gil, used the opportunity to take aim at President Park Geun-hye while stressing universal welfare and a gradual reunification with North Korea. Our Kim Hyun-ji reports.
Democratic Party chief Kim Han-gil criticized President Park's New Year's speech, saying she failed to provide concrete details on how she intends to improve the livelihoods of ordinary people in a country with the world's highest suicide rate among the young and senior citizens.
The president did not mention economic democratization or welfare, even once during her New Year's speech. It's shocking.
Kim said his party will promote welfare support aimed at helping people live a dignified life.
My party will strengthen policy for education, housing, and healthcare to stop the collapse of the middle class and restore the ladder of hope that enables the poor to move into the upper class.
Specifically, the Democratic Party chief said his party will push for free school meals, free high school education, and cutting the cost of college tuition in half. He added that he and his party will work toward putting a cap on rental prices, including jeonse, which requires that a large lump sum deposit be paid up front and is returned in full at the end of the rental period. Kim also called for a strengthening of public health care policy and an expansion of public medical facilities for patients with severe diseases and dementia. He stressed that the party will oppose any attempt by the government to privatize health care or railway services. He also said he welcomed President Park's concept of reunification as a jackpot for the two Koreas, but stressed that the government must be sure to take practical steps to improve inter-Korean relations and prepare for a gradual and peaceful reunification with North Korea. Targeting the local elections in June, the Democratic Party leader vowed to overcome the factionalism within his party and respond quickly to the public's demands. To break a long-standing deadlock in Parliament, he pledged to push for an independent investigation into the alleged illegal electioneering by state institutions in 2012. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
And at the nation's top office, another supportive reference by President Park Geun-hye about a possible reunification of the two Koreas.
In an interview with Bloomberg News published on Monday, President Park said reunification would serve as an opportunity for the Korean economy to take a, quote, fresh leap forward. She added that her administration would do its best to make more people understand and recognize the need for reunification. President Park also said that nobody knows when the two Koreas will become one again, but she pledged to work toward bringing about that day at an early date. So what would a unified Korea look like? For the first in our three-part series on reunification, we delve into economic benefits and challenges that may arise.
And to help us do just that, our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee joins us in the studio. Hello there, Sung-hee.
Good evening, guys. Simply put, President Park Geun-hye had said that reunification for both Koreas would be like hitting a jackpot. Now, before we get into why a reunified Korea could be beneficial to both sides and how, I went out to find out what the general public thinks.
I oppose reunification 100%. I predict that reunification will have a very negative effect on the South. If reunification were to take place at a time when both the South Korean economy and the North Korean economy were not doing well, I think both Koreas could collapse.
Because of the considerable differences between the South and the North, I think it would be better to boost economic cooperation between them, then move toward reunification. So for now, I'm against the idea of reunification.
So as you can see, not many people out there were enthusiastic about reunification. A recent poll conducted by the Joseonilbo shows only 2 in 10 South Koreans are saying yes to a reunified Korea. The majority seems to think reunification will just add to Seoul's economic burden.
So will it add to Seoul's economic burden, and by how much?
Well, Ji-hae, there are varying estimates on just how much it will cost for a reunified Korea, ranging from $800 billion to as much as $4.5 trillion. The Korea Institute for National Unification recently said it would cost $3.5 trillion to integrate the two Koreas during the first 20 years after reunification, but that 80% of the cost would come from the private sector and foreign investors. Now that means the actual cost to the government and to the general public would only be around $800 billion. And it seems like the economic benefits of reunification could be much larger than the initial cost.
So is this where the jackpot that President Park Geun-hye mentioned would show up?
That's right. If you take a look at the figures, reunification would definitely be like hitting the jackpot, and that will be evident in the speed of Korea's economic growth after reunification. Now, if we suppose that the two Koreas were to reunite this year, the pace of economic growth would more than double to hover at around 4.5% annually, at least throughout the next 4 decades. In fact, we would eventually see Korea rise as one of the world's 7 largest economies. South Korea is currently the world's 10th largest economy, but by 2050, a reunified Korea could move up to 5th place. Reunification will combine the population of the two Koreas for a total of 70 million, and it would slow the aging of the society since North Korea has a younger population than the South, and it would increase the number of people in the workforce. Now, with that, the per capita gross national income would increase from the current $23,000 in South Korea to more than $80,000 in a reunified Korea in 2050. And if there were no more security threats on the Korean peninsula, Korea could reduce its military spending to boost spending on more productive things.
Now, given the stark difference between the two Koreas in terms of economic and political systems, this unification must carry with it a host of problems.
Of course, Ji-hae, all of these positive figures are under the assumption that the reunification takes place gradually and smoothly. But experts have warned of a possible rise in social welfare spending in the event of reunification.
First of all, if the process of unification involves any kind of military conflict, then this conflict will affect both countries a lot in a negative way. The second one is if unification takes place in a radical way, as in Germany, then this will increase South Korea's expenditure on a social safety net in North Korea.
Experts also say that if there is any opposition to privatization in North Korea or policy mistakes in dealing with the integration of the two currencies, the cost of reunification will increase while the benefits will decrease.
All right, well, so many unknowns still out there, but thanks so much, Sung-Yi, for clarifying a lot of the picture.
My pleasure.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features
restrictions is on the rise.
Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report.
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Meaning came on the news are trying to cover up the South's true intentions.
Moving now to our five-part series on Korea's industrial competitiveness, we kick off with the parts and materials industry.
The sector, which used to depend heavily on imports, is now leading the nation's exports thanks to active corporate investment and government support. Our Hwang Ji-hae looks at the prospects and the challenges that remain.
This Korean semiconductor packaging company has recently found a way to make the world's thinnest chip.
Normally, companies produce 1 millimeter thick semiconductors, but we're able to produce them with a thickness of half of that. We are ahead of every other company.
Until around 10 years ago, Korean companies hardly reported any breakthrough in the manufacturing of parts and materials, but it's a different story these days. Now Korea is the world's fifth largest parts and materials exporting nation, closely following Japan.
And with the domestic parts and materials sectors getting a boost recently, the trade surplus last year reached a record high of nearly $100 billion.
That is nearly 40 times larger than the sector's trade surplus recorded in 2001. Exports of parts and materials currently take up almost half of the nation's overall exports. Experts say the improving competitive edge of Korea's finished goods are also helping the parts and materials sectors.
The rise in exports of products like television, mobile phones, automobiles, and machinery have pushed up demand for key components of those goods.
The Seoul government is determined to make Korea the world's fourth largest exporter of parts and materials by 2020, surpassing Japan and more than doubling the sector's trade surplus to $250 billion. While the nation has made a leap forward in manufacturing parts, it still lags behind in developing new materials.
The problem is Korea is far behind Japan in the area of new materials, while China is catching up fast in making parts.
To narrow the gap with Japan, the government has promised to pour $280 million into the local industry every year until 2025. Hwang Ji-hae, Arirang News.
It appears the Korean economy is becoming even more dependent on its two biggest conglomerates, Samsung and Hyundai Motor. Data released by Tibble.com shows that the combined operating profit of the two conglomerates accounted for more than 30% of that of all Korean companies for the first time in 2012. Samsung accounted for about 21%, while Hyundai Motor took up about 9%. Now, this is a combined increase of about 6% compared to the previous year. Now, experts have raised concerns that the country's heavy reliance on a few business giants could pose a risk for an overall economy during the time of a crisis. Responding to the report, Finance Minister Yingluck said on Monday that the government is analyzing the level of economic concentration of Samsung and Hyundai. Good news for Korean consumers looking for bargains on their favorite import products. The Finance Ministry said Monday that the price of foreign brand import clothing, cosmetics, and watches will drop by as much as 50% in Korea as early as March. It said the move is to enhance competition among importers and will increase the promotion of parallel imports to root out monopolies which are blamed for excessively high import costs. Parallel imports refer to the import of goods outside distribution channels that own exclusive sales rights in the nation.
And now to the birth of Korea's third ever cardinal in the Catholic Church's history. Archbishop Andrew Yum Soo-jung has been named one of the 19 new cardinals by Pope Francis, opening a new chapter for the local church. Our Yu Lian has more on his celebratory ceremony, where he explained the type of cardinal he hopes to be.
Dressed in a violet gown, Archbishop Yum Soo-jung seemed stern-faced during a ceremony at the Myeongdong Cathedral in central Seoul to celebrate his appointment as cardinal.
It seems like most of the people here are happy except for me. The title as new cardinal is a fearful and heavy one. I will work to create a church that serves the poor and those who are isolated from society.
Standing in front of about 300 Catholics and journalists who braved the freezing cold to attend the ceremony, Yum laid out his vision as cardinal.
Through my small sacrifices, sharing, and love, I will work toward creating a church that could heal the conflicts and divisions that are rampant in our society.
Archbishop Yum was appointed a cardinal by Pope Francis on Sunday at St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. He's currently the de facto leader of the Korean Catholic Church. Yum was born into and raised by a highly religious family. He graduated from the Catholic University of Korea in 1970, was ordained a priest in the same year, and was appointed as the 14th Catholic Archbishop of Seoul by Pope Benedict XVI in 2012. Yum also serves as chairman of the Catholic television channel Peace Broadcasting Corporation and continues the Pabo Nanum or Fools Sharing Foundation established by late Cardinal Stephen Kim Soo-hwan. Religious leaders in Korea welcomed the Pope's choice and expressed hope that Korea's church will contribute to the Asian and global Catholic communities. 18 others will join Yum as newly appointed cardinals. The decision on archbishops from Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and Haiti, which marked its 4th anniversary since a deadly earthquake, reflect Pope Francis' commitment to the poor. Andrew Yum Soo-jung will be officially appointed as a cardinal on February 22nd. Yoo Ji-hae, Arirang News.
Taking you now to Thailand, a shutdown in Bangkok begins with anti-government protesters blocking off many of the roads leading into the country's capital with the aim of forcing Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra from office and scuttling elections scheduled for February 2nd. Our Connie Kim reports.
In a planned protest to overthrow embattled Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra, about 50,000 protesters blocked major intersections in the capital city of Bangkok on Monday. Protesters said they will also cut off electricity and water supplies to some government offices. The People's Democratic Reform Committee protest group is behind Monday's Bangkok shutdown. They are demanding that an appointed government run the country and a cancellation of February elections, which Yingluck's ruling party are almost certain to win. They say the current leader is only a proxy for her brother, exiled former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, who was ousted by the military in 2006. 140 schools were closed on the first day of the demonstrations Monday, along with dozens of hospitals, hotels, and fire stations. The government has beefed up security, stationing about 20,000 police and military personnel in and around the capital. So far, the protests have been without violence. Ahead of the planned shutdown, protesters on Sunday, led by head protest leader Suthep Suban, started blocking major intersections in the capital to create traffic jams where an estimated 700,000 vehicles pass through on a daily basis. Things turned violent when unknown gunmen opened fire on a group of anti-government protesters at a rally site in Bangkok. At least 7 people were injured. Protest leader Suthep said the rallies will continue unless Prime Minister Yingluck steps down.
We cannot compromise on any offers. This is non-negotiable. So if we lose this fight, then we lose. If we win, then we win. There's no win-win for both sides.
The army and the police have expressed concerns of escalating violence that could lead to a coup attempt. Since the protests began in October, 8 people have died and 470 have been injured in street violence. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
With just 5 months to go until the World Cup, the South Korean men's national football team has begun its final preparations.
For more on how the team is gearing up for the big game, Stephen Che joins us with the details. Hello there.
Hey guys, the team is heading to Brazil for a week of training before heading to America for 12 days of more training, which includes 3 friendlies versus Costa Rica, Mexico, and the U.S. teams. Kim Shin-wook and Lee Kun-ho headline the 23-man roster, a group of domestic football players chosen by manager Hong Myung-bo. Meanwhile, Coach Hong has a tough task ahead of him as well. He still has to complete his squad, which means picking the right players to back up the starting 11. And staying with football, the Ballon d'Or award ceremony is being held in a few hours to honor the planet's top football player. Will it be 4-time winner Lionel Messi, 2008 winner Cristiano Ronaldo, or Bayern Munich's French jewel Franck Ribéry? Well, it seems like all the buzz is surrounding Ronaldo, who scored 55 times last year. The ceremony, being held in Zurich, Switzerland, begins at 1:30 a.m. Korea time. And moving on, the tennis season's first Grand Slam of the year, the Australian Open, has begun in Melbourne. Players from around the world are taking to the signature blue courts, trying to best the Australian summer heat as well as their opponents. Day 1 action saw the world's top-ranked players, most notably Novak Djokovic on the men's side and Serena Williams on the women's side, move on. Meanwhile, the PGA Tour's second tournament of 2014, the Sony Open, wrapped up in Hawaii. American Jimmy Walker took home the trophy and the $1 million prize with a 4-round score of 17 under par. And for some notables, Korean-American Kevin Na finished tied for 8th. The tank KJ Choi or Chae Kyung-ju ended in 20th place, while Bae Sang-moon, who led after round 1, fell to 32nd. And on to rally racing. The world's top off-road endurance race, the Dakar Rally, is entering the 8th of 13 stages. The competitors will take an 812-kilometer journey from Salta, Argentina to Calama, Chile. Meanwhile, the rally raid has already seen 3 deaths, 2 reporters and a motorcyclist, which is sadly a common occurrence in the grueling race. Now let's end with the current standings from the KBL, starting at the top. Mobis lands at first, having won all 4 matchups they played this month. SK, coming off an upset to KGC, stands at second, while LG is not far behind. KT and ET Land round out the top of the 5. And now we go on to the bottom. KCC catches up to the Orions with 14 wins apiece, along with Samsung at 8th. Meanwhile, KGC and Dongbu remain stuck in the basement. Now that does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
We got off to a cold start to the week here in Seoul, so are we in for a frigid work week?
For more on what we can expect in the next few days, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Good evening, guys. As you said, it was a freezing cold day here in Seoul, and it looks like this icy cold weather will last through at least Wednesday. Now, the Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-Buk-do provinces are under a cold wave alert, and a cold wave watch has been issued in most parts of the central region, so please be sure to bundle up and stay warm. Taking a look at the current conditions, the nation is under the influence of a cold high-pressure system, which is why we're seeing clear skies across the map. Now, it's not only cold, but also very dry. The humidity level in Seoul and the East Coast regions is at around 20%. So in this weather, it is important that you drink sufficient amounts of water and keep yourselves hydrated. Nevertheless, the good news is that the fine dust has disappeared thanks to the bitter cold conditions. Moving on to tomorrow's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -9 degrees with a high of 0. Meanwhile, Daegu and Gwangju peak at 4 and 3 degrees respectively. Moving on to other regions, Jeju reaches 5 degrees while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 2 and -8 degrees respectively. Well, that's all I have for you this hour, but I'll see you again after midnight.
And that's our broadcast on this Monday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.